Well, hello and welcome everyone to the second generation UKSAR Industry Day here from the Maritime and Coast Guard Agency. My name is Damien Oliver. I'm the Senior Responsible Owner for this programme, and welcome along. In this latest Industry Day presentation, my team and I will set out the next steps in the UKSAR2G programme, including how we've taken account of your feedback, how you can access draft tender documentation, and an updated timeline. But first, the now very familiar legal disclaimer. So I'm going to read this as I always do as I see it in front of me. The MCA is providing its current strategy on various aspects of the proposed procurement and current information. However, the MCA reserves the right to amend and update its strategy and all information at any time before the formal launch of a procurement process. The MCA has no liability for the accuracy, adequacy, or completeness of any information, and the MCA has no liability for any costs or expenses of any party. The MCA reserves the right to keep a record of any queries and to circulate such queries to interested parties. As familiar as the legal disclaimer is to everyone, so too are these housekeeping rules, but in case there's anyone new to the call, just a few things to bear in mind. I think we've got over the glitches we have around transitioning between slides and presenters, but I probably just cursed that, so if there is any delay when we switch between slides, do bear with us. If we look bemused, that's the reason why. This event is being recorded, so for people who can't join us today because of the holidays or because for other reasons, this will be available to watch back at your convenience on YouTube. You can submit questions at any time. You can do those now. You don't have to wait until the end of the presentation, and we'll happily take those at the end when we've gone through the slides. Bear in mind, of course, that your questions will be visible even if your name isn't, and if you want to ask questions anonymously, do drop us a line on the email address that you can see on the slide in front of you. Although also keep in mind that if we think the information that you've asked for is pertinent to other potential bidders, we reserve the right to share that information. And I'm not sure if this is still true or not, but we must point out that if you leave this presentation and want to rejoin, it may not be possible to do so for technical reasons. So the agenda for today's presentation starts with where we are today. We're going to then explain how we've responded to your invaluable feedback as you've been presenting it to us over the past several months. We're going to be talking about what's coming next because we are at a really critical juncture as far as this programme is concerned. The route to market that we're going to take and what that procurement route looks like, when you can access key documentation, the rest of the timelines, and then eventually we'll get to some Q&A. So where are we today? Well, I have to say, I'm eternally grateful to everyone who's participated in these events and given up your time in so doing. Your information, your insight has been absolutely invaluable. You know, you've helped us shape the requirement so that at the same time it meets our critical user needs, you're telling us or not whether it's achievable, innovative, or value for money, and we're really grateful to you for that. You turned out into these sessions in great numbers, and your questions have been hugely valuable, and they've certainly challenged our thinking, even if at times we might sound confident in what we're saying in reply. With the benefit of some reflection, we have decided to change some things given what you've put to us, both in questions and in feedback. We've welcomed your feedback on the data model, and I think it's probably fair to say it's been an eye-opener for all of us. You've certainly spotted some interesting interplay between the data model and the user requirement that we've put to you as well, and that's why we're reshaping some of that to reflect what the data model is telling us and what you've told us in your testing of that model. So again, thank you very much indeed for those of you who have been attempting to break that model as we've asked you to. It's been really, really invaluable. And indeed, when it comes to the user requirement, you've spotted some deliberate mistakes, which we are addressing through your interactions with my technical team. And again, very many thanks to those of you who have done that. So how have we responded to your feedback? Well, we have agreed now with everybody that we will definitely have a fourth lot. So you will be able to bid on lots 1, 2, and 3 separately, all together. But if you wanted to bid an integrated lot 4, that is going to be achievable under this procurement. You will have access to equipment and assets. So we've already explained how you will get access to key information regarding the incumbent service provider, and shortlisted bidders will have access to even more information and sites and equipment, and that will be explained as to how that will happen in due course. We will be using the competitive procedure with negotiation as a procurement route, and more on that in a bit. And as I said before, you've certainly spotted some points that we've taken on board as far as the single statement of user need is concerned, and things that might not be as agnostic as possible, and therefore we've changed some of that to reflect some of that feedback where you provided it to us. We've added some clarity to the data model by adding some red lines, some minimum requirements, again following your feedback on that. And you'll see how the weighting of the scoring criteria is reflective of our actual ambition, which is a higher quality, higher value for money service. Not to say that the service that is in place today isn't of a quality and value for money, but improving upon that, where price is important, but is not as important as the quality of the service. And you'll see that in the weightings that are explained in the various tender documentation that will be released in draft very soon. So what is next? So we've been busily working away on developing a vast array of tender documentation while at the same time as engaging with you all. And it's been a truly Herculean effort on the part of my team in pulling that information together. And when you see it, you'll know what I'm talking about. And that starts with the release of the draft selection questionnaire. Some of you might have known this at one time as the pre-qualification questionnaire, and the associated memorandum of information, which explains how you go about completing that questionnaire. And more on that, as I say, in just a moment. These documents will set out the proposed criteria in order for you to be invited to tender at the next stage. And we will welcome your feedback on the draft selection questionnaire and memorandum of information when we release it imminently. And Neil Grant, the Programme Director for UKSAR2G, is going to explain when that will be in just a moment. So the procurement route itself looks a little bit like this. So we will be launching the selection questionnaire in the new year. The selection questionnaire, previously called the pre-qualification questionnaire, basically looks back on experience and financial standing. So it enables us to take a judgment on your ability to be able to mount a bid were we to invite you to tender. And it's at that stage we would undertake following evaluation of the questionnaire and initial down selection. Those who make it through that process will be invited to tender, and it's those tenders that we will evaluate. Once we've evaluated them, we may well conduct another down selection. It's not necessarily guaranteed. And those who are invited to go through to the next stage will be invited to take part in negotiations. Now, I use that word quite broadly because the negotiation stage isn't just about driving increased value for money out of the service based on what you're bidding us. But I think more crucially for everyone on this call, it's our opportunity to work with you to really sharpen the bids that you're putting forward so that the best possible bid is put forward at the invitation to submit final tender stage. Because it's at that stage that final tenders means final tenders. Because when we get to the point that we have a bidder that we want to take through to contract award, there is no room for further negotiation. That's it. This isn't competitive dialogue where we can conduct further negotiations once we've got to a preferred bidder stage. So assuming that we get all of the approvals that we seek once that final tender has been evaluated and the bidder that we want to take through to contract award has been selected, contract award is then what follows. So now I'm going to hand over to Neil Grant, who's the Programme Director, who's going to talk about how you're going to get access to key documentation and the rest of the procurement timelines.
Thanks, Damien. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Neil Grant and I'm the UKSAR2G Programme Director. So what are we releasing over the next 2 months? Well, in late November, early December this year, we released the draft selection questionnaire and memorandum of information. This, as Damien has discussed, is the first stage of the procurement process and is the process by which we will assess and down select participants to move to the invitation to tender stage. A lot of the questions are standard mandatory questions which apply to all government selection questionnaires and cannot be changed. So I would ask you focus on financial and technical elements within the SQ when it's released. Along with the SQ, the memorandum of information sets out how we will evaluate your responses and scoring criteria associated with that. And we welcome your feedback on these documents, as Damien said. So moving on from that, in mid-December, we will aim to release the first draft of the invitation to tender. This document details what we're looking to procure, along with details on what we require in terms of financial, technical and commercial aspects, and how we will evaluate those responses to the ITT. As it's the first draft, other details such as the annexes which support that will follow. But we really want to get this out to you as early as possible so you can see what we're seeking to achieve as part of UKSAR2G and for you to provide that early feedback. And we see this being a very iterative process. In January 2021, we will release a draft financial model. Now, this is the tool that participants will use to input their costs of the solution and will be used to evaluate the financial aspects of the tender, which is explained in the ITT. We'll also aim to release an updated draft SSUN, single statement of user need, which Damien explained, taking account of the feedback from yourselves in the engagement sessions we've had and from other stakeholders. Along with these documents, we'll also release an updated 3D model. One of the key elements, which Damien touched on, will be the introduction of a minimum threshold requirement. This means that participants will have clarity on whether a solution will meet our demand before submitting any solution as part of a bid. All of these documents we will aim to have, provide further sessions to talk through these releases as and when we're able to do so. We aim to launch the procurement on the 25th of January 2021, with release of the SQ at that date, with around a six-week period for participants to respond to the SQ, with SQ submissions due back on the 8th of March. We'll then evaluate the responses and down select for around 7 weeks, taking us to the end of April 2021, when we will then inform participants of the decision. For those who are shortlisted, they will move to the ITT phase. In early May 2021, we will issue the invitation to tender, allowing around 10 weeks for participants to form their solution and their responses, with responses due back on the 9th of July 2021. We will then evaluate the responses and potentially shortlist, as Damien said, for participants to move forward to negotiations. This will conclude around late September. Negotiations with those participants who've got through that stage on their tender responses will take place between September through to the end of November 2021, around 10 weeks. We will then aim to issue the invitation to submit financial tenders, the ISFT, at the end of November, with responses due back by the middle of January 2022. We will then evaluate those responses, and having identified the winning participant or participants, depending on the outcome of the evaluation, this will be done by the middle of February 2022. Unfortunately, at this stage, we cannot go straight to award, as I'm sure some of you like, as we have to go through our internal assurance and approval process. This includes external assurance from Cabinet Office and Treasury approval points. So we see us exiting the internal governance and approvals phase around early July 2022, with an awarding contract or contracts in mid to late July 2022, following this mandatory standstill period. Following that, this will then commence the mobilisation phase for circa 24 months, when the first SAR-H base is due to come offline in September 2024 to be replaced by the new service. We then see a rolling transition phase as the new service replaces the existing services over a 26-month period, with a fully contracted solution or solutions going into steady state operations by the end of December 2026. As I said, we welcome your feedback on the SQ and other documents as we release them to you. If you would like to access the SQ document and any other documents, please email the UKSAR2G mailbox. Specifically for the SQ, we'd welcome your feedback by the 18th of December on this document in particular. That's it from me. Damien, back to you.
So I think you've heard an awful lot of preparation has gone into producing these documentation sets for the tender process, which will kick off at the end of January. And I have to say, big thank you to the team for sticking rigidly to the quite ambitious timelines that we had from the very beginning, and from the very first session when we started speaking to you way back in March on one of these engagement sessions, or possibly April. And I think at that time it seemed very ambitious, and it still does. But thanks to everyone involved, including all of those who work with us in the Department for Transport and elsewhere in central government, for enabling us to get to this critical juncture where we can launch the tender at the end of January. Of course, if that changes for any reason, we will let you know. But I think the main point I want to make all over again, as I said from the very beginning, is what we're intending to do here is build upon the service that's in place today. We want to make the competition as fair and as open as possible. And so it's important that you tell us about anything that you think might be getting in the way of innovation, value for money, a fair competition, because we can do something about that even at this relatively late stage. And the purpose, of course, of sharing with you the selection questionnaire and the ITT documentation is just that, so that you have the opportunity to tell us what it is that we could usefully improve, because we don't have the monopoly on wisdom when it comes to these sorts of things, as experienced as we are in running and managing these sorts of services. The questions are now coming in, and I'm going to have to get closer to the screen because my eyesight's appalling. Could I please provide more information on Lot 4? So Lot 4 is essentially the integrated lot. It's not new for us. For those who bid for the current search and rescue helicopter contract, you might recall there were two main lots, one for a smaller lift capacity requirement, a second lot for a larger lift capacity requirement, and a third lot which was both of those together. The purpose of the fourth lot is to give those bidders who want to be able to bid for all three to be able to do so with the certainty that you will secure all three by bidding for the fourth lot. But it doesn't stop anyone from bidding for the individual lots by themselves, and it doesn't disadvantage anyone from bidding for those individual lots. And when you see the evaluation strategy in the invitation to tender, I think you'll conclude, as we already have, that the evaluation itself is entirely fair, and so those who decide to bid for individual lots will not be disadvantaged from those who decide to bid for Lot 4. It's just an opportunity for those who want to be able to do so, and gives that space for that. So I hope that answers that question. Next question is, you allow Lot 4, but will you allow a Lot 1 and a Lot 2 combined offer? Yeah, of course, you can. There are any number of combinations you could make, but the point about bidding for Lot 1 and Lot 2 is that you may very well win Lot 1, but you may very well not win Lot 2. So those are the risks that you take by bidding for the individual lots. But on the other hand, you may wish only to bid for those individual lots, and in which case that's absolutely fine as well. And again, the evaluation strategy is designed to make sure that everything is fair and equal, and the evaluation of the individual lots is given as much importance as the evaluation for Lot 4. Next question, the assets being made available as part of levelling the playing field, will that include all assets currently providing the existing service, including those owned and leased by BHL? So the short answer is it's helicopters and basing, and you'll have the opportunity to negotiate with Bristow yourselves as to how you go about doing that. But the purpose of what we've secured under the level playing field is to make sure that that mechanism is in place for you to be able to negotiate a route to access existing helicopters that provide this current service and bases, and that's available to you through direct interaction with Bristow based on the agreements that we facilitated up front. Draft documents be managed ahead of formal issue in late January 2021. So the comments on the draft documents looked at, and just as we've done all along, to be honest, we'll make sure that any feedback pertinent and important to the things I mentioned earlier, level playing field, make sure those are incorporated within the tender documentation. It may also be that there are things that may just appear slightly opaque, in which case we can clarify those points as well. Is there any plan to ensure coherence across the three original lots if no Lot 4 bids are considered acceptable? That's a really good question, and something that's come up before is how you make sure that three lots that may be awarded potentially to three individual operators can work well together. I'm not going to try and sound too kind of pioneer about it, but we've got experience of working with different operators at one time, three different operators working towards the same ends, and it does work. We can come to a common goal and a consensus to work together, but we're strengthening that through the way in which the tender is structured. And you'll see again when it comes to bids for individual lots and how those would work together in practice and in reality, were we to operate with or work with different operators, that's very clearly set out in the tender documentation as well. And so I'd say watch the space as far as that's concerned, but it'll be very clear to you once you see the invitation to tender. And if indeed it isn't when you see the draft, please do say so and we can add further clarity. Will Lot 4 include further detail on the data systems currently used by MCA, including those that will be handed over to the incoming service providers. I'm going to not go into too much detail about data, because data is something that's interesting for us. It's evolving a lot in the MCA. And in the next iteration of the user requirement, you'll see that actually what we want you to do with data is probably less burdensome, put it that way, than perhaps we'd first suggested, because we want to be able to take more control over both in the operational environment, also at the tactical level and the strategic level. But we'll be clearer about that in the user requirement. It's a good question. But data is a critical component to UKSAR2G, but what we want to do is take, as an authority, more ownership about how we actually manage that data and interpret it for our own ends, and that will become clearer in the next iteration of the user requirement. We understand that there is a change in requirement for the Lot 1 helicopters that requires the aircraft to carry 2 stretchers. This has the potential to prevent the use of smaller, more cost-effective platforms and drive the bidder to similar size large helicopters as today. Is the MCA intent for more of the same types of helicopters? Well, you know, when I said earlier, we planted some deliberate mistakes. That's one such example. So we'll be clearer about that in the next iteration of the user requirement. The short answer is we are truly solution agnostic. We will not be favouring any particular type of helicopter, save for making sure that it meets both the user requirement in how it will be drafted and the data model. And those two things will be compatible by the time you see the next iteration of the draft. So thank you to those who pointed that out. You're quite right to highlight it as a limitation. It's a limitation we've taken very seriously and one that we've addressed. Have you set the maximum number of bidders to manage the bandwidth of your resource? Yes, we have. Again, that'll be set out in the draft tender documentation. Clearly, we can only manage so many bidders from an evaluation point of view, and what you wouldn't want us to do is invite huge numbers of people through the first stage, make half a job of evaluating it at the expense of everyone who's gone through. You'd want to make sure that we take through the best possible bids at each stage, and we'll explain what those numbers look like in the invitation to tender, so that will also become clearer. Do you have a preference on commercial structures if multiple companies were to bid together? No, is the long and short of it. So long as you can explain, you know, where the accountability rests, you know, how the structure will work, how it will you know, meet our financial due diligence requirements. We have no preference or otherwise for the structure of the bid when it comes through, and we fully recognise there'll be a variety of different structures when it comes to bidding entities, and we're ready to be able to work with all of those. We've got some very experienced advisors working with us who are used to lots of different ways and lots of different bidding structures in previous procurements. So we're pretty ready for that when it comes through, and so no, there is no issue there at all. The recent Vivace competition for data fusion is unlikely to inform the ITT properly. How will this be managed? So that goes back to my earlier point about us taking more control over data. I think you're probably right to say that's quite nascent, but the principle of the thing is that we want to be able to manage the data ourselves. So take it from you, manage it in the operational environment in the way that makes sense to us. And it's not just data that comes from our aircraft, clearly, it's also data that comes from elsewhere, lifeboats, other SAR assets, to inform the current and future picture. As we go through the procurement phase, that will become clearer, and certainly when we get to the negotiation phase, we'll be working with you to refine your bids to make sure it meets the demands that we have on you as far as data is concerned. But I wouldn't be too concerned at this early stage. It's not something that we're going to be asking you to do that is particularly onerous, probably far less onerous, in fact, than what we've described up till now. For clarity, how will the MCA make sure that pricing and commercial arrangements provided by BHL will be fair and common across all bidders? We have agreed with Bristow how the price will be calculated for both the helicopters and the bases. Having agreed that mechanism, it is for you bidders and Bristow to reach an agreement on the price thereafter. So it is something we've done to create the level playing field, but frankly, we've gone as far as we reasonably can in ensuring that you get access both to those aircraft and those bases, and that you do so in the most fair and equitable way possible. And that's through the mechanisms that we've secured that explain how it is that you get access to that infrastructure. But there is ultimately a negotiation between and the incumbent, and we would not be involved in that, having already secured the mechanism under which that would happen. Are we able to visit the fixed wing delivery site and capability as part of level playing field? If not, may I respectfully ask why not? It's a good question. We would need to talk to the incumbent before we could commit to that. It is not something we have made provision for, I don't think, at the moment, unless any of the teams tell me otherwise. But let me take that away and we'll see what we can do. The default data submissions have all lots. Do you have any intention to include default data submissions for lots 1, 2, 3, and 4? I think this goes back to my earlier point, which is how you bid. You can bid for individual lots, or you can bid for lot 4, or you can bid for individual lots and lot 4, and therefore you can choose how you put forward submissions for each of those lots. And if I've got that wrong, or I haven't answered the question, do come back to me. So I'm not sure I'm entirely clear on what you're asking. Transit speed to the edge of the exclusive economic zone in lot 3 significantly restricts the types of aircraft which could be used to conduct what were originally thought to be proactive missions to pre-planned with sufficient warning to allow the use of UAS in danger areas. Will this be modified for the revised lot 3 requirement? Please drop us a line. If you think you've spotted something which limits innovation, value for money, creates an unfair playing field, tell us. We can do something about it now. Give us some more flesh on the bone, and we'll work out whether or not that's something we need to address, if that's okay with you. I think this is a follow-up to the previous one. In the data model, is there no way to filter by, okay, is there no way to filter by lot? Can that be included? John Foster is on the call. I don't know if he can actually speak because he's a producer, but if he can, John, are you able to address that? And indeed, are you able to talk?
Yeah, can you Yep, brilliant. So in the data model, there's no way to filter by lot. Can that be included? I'm pretty sure there is. If you want to get in touch with me, then please do, and I can run a demo past you. There are 2 sets of filters in the demo model. One in the direct dashboard, which you can see on the right-hand column, and then a further hidden set of filters, which are accessed through a button on the top right of the dashboard screen. You should almost certainly be able to filter by lots. So get hold of me by email, and we can set up a call, and I can demo it as soon as possible. Thanks.
Thanks, John. Next question: can you confirm if oil dispersion is part of this contract? That is to say, the current 737 tasks. No is the first answer. However, in the event of a major pollution incident, it would be all hands, and we would expect support from aviation more generally and Coast Guard livery to support such an event. But no, there's no intention to include the provision of oil dispersant aircraft as part of UKSAR2G. Is there any requirements on UK sovereign approach, such as using as much as possible UK assets involving small, medium, innovative UK business to boost their competitiveness? So I mean, it probably goes without saying that clearly we've got a very keen eye on UK productivity and UK growth as far as SAR2G is concerned. And I've said all along, bids are stronger if you can explain what the contribution to the UK will be as part of your solution and your bid. Because clearly that is something that's incredibly important to us now and more than ever. So please do bear that in mind when you come to submit your tenders. And again, how that will be evaluated will be very clearly set out in the tender documentation. Oh no, there's a question here on T's and C's. The DfT T's and C's create challenging liability commitments. How will this be managed equitably to avoid elimination of potentially innovative bids? Joe, I think it's one of those things again, where if there's something you're smelling that doesn't quite feel like it's working well with the 3 things I've mentioned before, innovation, value for money, level playing field, please do drop us a line, explain what it is that you think that might be the concern, because again, this is the point at which we can do something about it if it's something that we do need to do about it, and we can address those concerns through a direct conversation with you. With regards to lot 3, to what degree do MCA see mission overlap with other agencies such as Fisheries and Border Force, particularly with regards to English Channel operations? Just as our fixed-wing planes today support those very same organisations in a range of missions that will not change in the future, we will continue to do so into the future when those same organisations request our support. We're not part of those organisations when our assets are not allocated to those organisations and our contract is not part with those same organisations. But it would be ridiculous in many ways for us to have aircraft on the ground ready to launch when there's something else going on for which they could add utility and they're not being tasked to support. So we've very much changed that as far as the current fixed wing service is concerned, operated by 2XL, in support of those organisations and others for a range of tasks and missions, and we very much see that carrying on into the future. And the profile of hours that we've indicated in the model and in the documentation you've seen so far and that you will see reflects that wider usage. So it's not that there's that core Coast Guard function and there's this sort of nebulous set of tasks that we haven't defined and accounted for elsewhere. That's not the case. And what we've said includes all of what you've described there as well. Is there any feedback from the MCA UAV trial available? We've had the draft report through. It's being worked on by my technical team in collaboration with Elbit UK, and we'll have that outcome published very, very soon. I don't have a clear timeline for that just right now. Maybe we'll take that away and give you a clear indication as to where that is in correspondence in due course, but that is being worked on. Like I say, we have the draft report from that trial. The trial itself was extremely positive, went very well. Now pouring through the data to see how we move on to the next stage, and that's exactly what's happening right now. I'm not clear on what you are saying. You're not the first person to say that. I understand we can bid for lot 1 and separately for lot 2, but can we bid for a combined lot 1 and 2 together? Yes, you can. So, but they would be bid as individual lots. So if you bid for lot 1 and lot 2, you won lot 1, but you didn't win lot 2, you wouldn't get lot 2, if that makes sense. They have to be evaluated separately. Let me put it that way. Will there be any limitation on the number of bidders to go through to ITT? Yes, and the ITT will set that out. We have to be able to apply proper due diligence and scrutiny to the evaluation of all bids, and that means we have to limit those numbers that come through in a manageable way. Having said that, what we won't be doing is eliminating potential bidders at the ITT stage and further bidders going through the ITT stage who we think are compliant. So it's a balancing act to be struck. But yes, there will be a limit on that. I'll invite Neil to speak to this next question. Do you have an update on base visit timing, Neil?
Thanks, Damien. Given the current national state with COVID, we haven't been able to get base visits up and running. So we're looking at innovative ways of how we can give people access to base information, which may not be part of a visit, or maybe some online videos if we can't actually do the visit in a physical form. So we're looking at solutions to get over that in these current times, COVID permitting. But we'd hope to get this information out in January.
Will there be any statistics related to the number of tasks involving stretcher cases that are carried on or winched, and will that be made available? John?
No, we don't have sufficient data to support that. That's been identified as a data gap and is being rectified from now on. But unfortunately, historical data doesn't provide us with high quality or enough quality in that area, I'm afraid. Sorry.
Next one is, when are the face-to-face individual online engagement meetings planned to start? Neil, do you just want to explain what's happening there?
Yep. So we've done a lot of face-to-face engagement already in meetings through the market consultation exercise. We've had over 20 plus respondents that who we had face-to-face meetings with, and we're going through a stage with our technical teams having one-to-ones with those organisations who requested meetings, and they're taking place as we speak. But we're always open to further engagement events. Just drop the UKSAR2G mailbox a line if you'd like to discuss anything with us, and we'll see if we can get a meeting set up prior to launch of the event in January.
So if we are unhappy with the position Bristow are taking on negotiating airframes or building pricing, will there be a route to protest? I mean, to be honest, if I'm being, frank, not for us. We've done what we can to ensure the level playing field exists. In the end, it will still come down to a negotiation with Bristow, who are obliged to give you access to information and price assets in a certain way. We've done as much as we can do in that regard to make that level playing field level without actively getting involved into those negotiations, which for us would represent quite a difficult conflict as far as the competition is concerned. So the short answer of that is no. Do the MC have a plan for UAV regulations development allowing operation over populated areas and in non-segregated airspace? So we've been talking a lot about flying unmanned aircraft, it's fair to say, over the maritime domain, and that's certainly been the easier to get to milestone, but it's certainly clearly more straightforward than flying over populated areas. The part of the trial that we did and conducted with Elbit was also working with UK policing who have that requirement. So the short answer is it remains the ambition, but clearly flying large unmanned aircraft over metropolitan London is going to be a very, very tall order. But we've got to keep trying. We've got to not lose the ambition to make these things possible. And thanks to a extremely forward-looking regulator in the form of the CAA, we are best placed ever to achieve what we want to when it comes to the use of unmanned aircraft in unsegregated airspace. But we should none of us underestimate the challenge, and I'm sure we don't. That is ahead of us in making that happen. Following on from your response on Lot 3 and parallel tasking, it would make best sense to avoid creating any reactive posture in Lot 3 to allow the best management of available assets. Is this intended? If I've understood that question correctly, what you're saying is we mustn't duplicate effort, if that's what you're saying. So what we do at the moment, if I've got that right, is that for the flying program for our fixed-wing aircraft, we'll undertake flights that often will be on behalf of a range of stakeholders who have an interest in a particular area, not just one. So we try to maximize every flying hour by using information we receive that might be available and relevant to not just one stakeholder, but others besides. And so we try to avoid duplicating effort as much as we can. At the moment, that flying program is managed by the team that I have in the MCA, working with the Joint Maritime Security Centre at Portsdown Hill, who are very key to working with all those stakeholders that you've described earlier, and also working with those other stakeholders more directly when it comes to their flying programs as well. So the mechanisms are actually in place for coordination, and they're also getting better through the development of the Joint Maritime Security Centre in particular. So I think that's an evolving picture, an improving one, and the quite complicated picture that exists around fixed-wing surveillance will become much less opaque by the time we get to contract award. I'm sounding like the eternal optimist today, but I do genuinely believe it. Is there any similar organisation worldwide that you see as a model of where you would like to be in the future? Single organisation, but there are other places in the world that have been doing certain things in a certain way that we're learning from. So Australia, for example, when it comes to the use of fixed-wing aircraft, clearly the landscape is very different. Likewise in Canada. Our colleagues in Ireland have been doing this for a very long time in the way that they have. But it's quite difficult to find very many places in the world that have gone as far as we have in this space. So we have to do it on the basis of what our data tells us is necessary, what we feel and what we've tested with you is value for money and innovative. And I don't mind being at the leading edge of that. And there are other places in the world that are looking at what we're doing and seeking to mirror some or all of it. So it's quite difficult to pick any one place in the world that we're trying to emulate. I suppose another place would be that's doing something sort of similar would be Hong Kong, but nowhere, as far as I'm aware, has gone as far as we've gone with search and rescue aviation in this particular way. How will Lot 3 be assessed in the model? For example, 2 King Airs based pretty much anywhere north and south will meet the requirement, or indeed in Doncaster. Will it come down to price? John, is there anything you want to mention as far as the model and the evaluation is concerned?
Yeah, that is a good question, and I'm still deliberating the scoring criteria for Lot 3 itself. I can understand the concern that you're raising through your question. I at this stage do not have a confirmation of how or what the scoring criteria will be, but I'm working on it for Friday the 4th of December. So we're nearly there. There's a few niggles in the model that we need to iron out. But I understand the concern. We're working on it, but as of today, we don't currently have a solution.
Thank you, John. How will you judge a non-compliance versus a threshold requirement, which is of extremely low occurrence? So I think what you're saying is if there was one non-compliance amongst 100 different requirements or more that didn't quite meet the threshold, how would we judge that? Look out for the ITT. It'll explain what we will do in such circumstances. Clearly, we want to make sure that the tender is not going to throw out a bid which is promising, but has within it something which is perhaps slightly less comfortable to us. But on the other hand, there are ways in which we can clarify such things were we to be concerned about that before it got to the stage where we would effectively exclude a bid, if that makes sense. So it'll be explained in the ITT, but we're not in the game of excluding bidders for without discussion first and on very minor points, unless they are something which we can't live with. Will there be any restrictions on teaming once bidders have pre-qualified? No, there's not, but you have to remember if your bid structure changes after pre-qualification, you will have to go through the selection questionnaire again. Okay, so bear that in mind. If the structure of your organisation changes after the SQ process, we reserve the right to apply that same process all over again to make sure that you meet the criteria. And of course, if in fact you didn't, then you could be excluded. So I just need to be clear on that. So again, thank you everybody for your questions and again your time. It's truly invaluable. I say again, everything that you said to us has been incredibly useful. What we started with now and what we have has been changed and made better because of all the feedback you provided us all along the way. Seems like a long time ago we did one of these sessions, but we are very nearly at the end of this pre-engagement period. Not much longer to go now, and then the really hard work begins. So thank you everybody again for your time. Speak again very, very soon. And I should also point out further engagement sessions are just around the corner to explain what we're going to do with the tender documentation in more detail. Keep an eye out for those. But for now, thank you very much, and we'll speak again very soon.